The air in the conference room felt stale, thick with tension and unspoken betrayals. Sienna, 32, sat across from her older brother, Daniel, his expression carefully composed. Their family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. My phone buzzed with a new message, a photo from my cousin. Daniel was smiling wide, arm wrapped around our elderly Aunt Evelyn, his eyes glinting with something smug. The timestamp said it was from yesterday. A day I wasn't there. A day that, I now realized, had changed everything. The will reading had just ended. Mr. Henderson looked at me, his voice low and hesitant. Sienna, your aunt made some last-minute changes. I'm sorry, but your share has been reduced. Significantly. Almost entirely. My pulse spiked. I could barely breathe. Daniel gave a small shrug, like he'd rehearsed it. Then he said, calm and condescending, Aunt Evelyn just wanted what was best. She had some concerns. Concerns? My mind reeled. No warning. No explanation. Just the sting of betrayal from the one person I trusted most. Before I dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by family and stood back up stronger, hit like and subscribe. Your support fuels these stories of resilience. Life before that moment held a comfortable, predictable rhythm. My small apartment, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was my haven. Each morning, the soft glow of the sunrise filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes across my worn wooden floor. I'd wake to the gentle chirping of birds outside my window, a familiar symphony that always brought a smile to my face. My first ritual was always the same, a freshly brewed cup of herbal tea, the steam rising in delicate tendrils as I sat by the window, watching the world awaken. I'd scroll through my favorite news feeds, sometimes a novel, letting the quiet moments of the morning settle my mind before the rush of the day. My work, as a freelance graphic designer, allowed me the flexibility to create my own schedule, to chase projects I genuinely believed in. The satisfying click of my mouse, the vibrant colors blooming on my screen as I brought a client's vision to life, filled me with a quiet sense of accomplishment. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine, built on years of hard work and a dedication to my craft. My relationship with Aunt Evelyn was a tapestry woven with threads of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and unwavering support. She wasn't just an aunt, she was a second mother, a confidant, a pillar of strength in my life. Growing up, while my own parents were often preoccupied with their careers, Aunt Evelyn had been there, a constant source of warmth and wisdom. She'd teach me how to bake her famous apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filling her cozy kitchen. We'd spend hours in her garden, her gentle hands guiding mine as we tended to roses and hydrangeas. Her house, a charming two-story Victorian filled with antique furniture and the lingering scent of lavender and old books, felt more like home to me than any other place. She never had children of her own, and in many ways, I felt like her adopted daughter. We spoke almost every day, her comforting voice a balm to any stress or worry. I cherished our weekly Sunday dinners, where she'd tell stories from her youth, her eyes twinkling with mischief. My brother, Daniel, was often present, but his visits were less frequent, more perfunctory, a quick stop-in rather than a lingering connection. I was the one who drove Aunt Evelyn to her doctor's appointments, who helped her with her groceries, who spent countless hours simply sitting with her, listening to her stories, sharing quiet moments. I took care of her garden, maintained her old house, and ensured she was comfortable and happy in her later years. It wasn't a burden, it was a privilege, an expression of the deep love and gratitude I felt for her. I remember one particularly cold winter, when Aunt Evelyn had a bad fall. I dropped everything, rushed to her side, and stayed with her for weeks, nursing her back to health, bringing her warm meals, reading to her, and simply being there. Daniel called once, maybe twice, during that entire period. I didn't resent it, I just understood that our relationships with Aunt Evelyn were different. Mine was built on presence, on care, on a profound emotional connection. Hers was a life of quiet dignity, filled with a gentle spirit and a keen observation of the world around her. And I was fiercely protective of her peace, of her happiness. My future, I always imagined, would include Aunt Evelyn, her wisdom a guiding light, her love a constant comfort. The thought of a life without her was unbearable, but the idea of her legacy, the small inheritance she had always hinted at, was less about the money and more about the continuation of her warmth, her generosity, her unwavering belief in me. It was a promise, a symbol of our bond. The initial tremors of betrayal were so subtle, I almost dismissed them. Like faint echoes in a quiet room, they were easy to ignore at first. It began with Daniel's increasingly frequent visits to Aunt Evelyn's house, especially in the last few months. This was unusual. His visits were normally sporadic, brief, and often seemed driven by obligation rather than genuine affection. Now, he was there almost daily, his car parked in her driveway for hours. When I'd call Aunt Evelyn, her voice, usually so eager, would sometimes sound strained, a little distant. She'd occasionally make vague comments about Daniel helping her with financial matters or important decisions, things she had always consulted me on, or at least discussed openly. I'd feel a prickle of unease, a slight tremor of concern, but I'd brush it off. Daniel was family, after all. He wouldn't intentionally do anything to hurt Aunt Evelyn, or me. Then came the small, yet significant, changes. Aunt Evelyn, who had always been meticulously organized, started misplacing documents. Her once pristine financial records became slightly disordered. I'd offer to help, but she'd wave me off, saying, "Oh, Daniel's handling it, dear. He's so good with numbers." A knot of worry began to form in my stomach. Daniel, who had never shown much interest in her affairs, was suddenly her financial guru? It didn't add up. I noticed a new lock on her antique desk, the one where she kept her important papers. It was a subtle change, easily overlooked, but it snagged my attention. Aunt Evelyn always left that desk unlocked, a testament to her trust in me. Now, it was a closed door. One afternoon, I called Aunt Evelyn, and she sounded uncharacteristically agitated. "Sienna, dear, I need to ask you something." Daniel said. "He said you mentioned something about wanting to sell my house, after I'm gone. Is that true?" My blood ran cold. "What? No. Aunt Evelyn, of course not. I would never say that." There was a pause, a heavy silence on the line. "Oh," she said, her voice small, "he must have misunderstood." But her tone lacked conviction. The seed of doubt, planted weeks ago, began to sprout into a thorny bush of suspicion. Daniel was actively fabricating stories, poisoning Aunt Evelyn's mind. The mini-climax, the moment everything clicked into place, came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had driven over to Aunt Evelyn's, bringing her a homemade lasagna. As I approached her front door, I heard voices from inside, Daniel's distinctively sharp tone cutting through the quiet. The front door was slightly ajar, a rare oversight. I hesitated, then pushed it open just enough to hear. Daniel was speaking, his voice low, but chillingly clear. "She's always been after your money, Aunt Evelyn. Remember how she pressured you about that car? Or that time she insisted you pay for her college textbooks? She just sees you as a bank." His words were a venomous lie, a twisted caricature of our loving relationship. The car he referenced was one I had helped her research and buy, and the college textbooks were a small loan I had immediately paid back, with interest. He was weaving a narrative of greed and manipulation, painting me as a calculating opportunist. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful drumbeat against the shock and disbelief. Then I heard Aunt Evelyn's shaky voice. "But Daniel, Sienna has always been so good to me. She takes care of me. Daniel's voice hardened. That's just to keep you sweet, Auntie. She knows what she stands to gain. She even said she didn't want to be burdened with managing the house, that it would be better to just sell it off quickly. That was the lie he had been planting, the one that had made Aunt Evelyn's voice distant. I felt a wave of nausea. He was systematically dismantling our bond, brick by brick, with malicious falsehoods. I backed away from the door, my legs feeling like jelly, a cold rage starting to build in my chest. The rain outside seemed to mirror the storm brewing within me. Daniel wasn't just being selfish, he was actively destroying our relationship, poisoning Aunt Evelyn's last days with lies, all for money. This wasn't just a slight, it was a deep, calculated betrayal. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that it was all about the will. The initial wave of shock gradually gave way to a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Sienna retreated to her apartment, the sound of Daniel's venomous lies replaying in her mind, a cruel, mocking loop. Pain, sharp and searing, tore through her. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the insidious nature of it. He hadn't just taken something from her, he had tried to rewrite her history, to corrupt the purest relationship in her life. The thought of Aunt Evelyn, sweet and trusting, being fed such vile falsehoods twisted Sienna's stomach into knots. Guilt gnawed at her, why hadn't she seen it sooner? Why hadn't she pushed back against his increased presence, his vague pronouncements? Had she been too complacent, too trusting of family? Anger, hot and righteous, began to simmer beneath the surface. It wasn't just anger at Daniel, but a fierce indignation on behalf of Aunt Evelyn. How dare he manipulate her, play on her vulnerabilities, tarnish the love they shared? Doubt, a persistent whisper, tried to creep in. Could she really fight this? Daniel was cunning, and Aunt Evelyn was frail. Would confronting him just cause more pain for their beloved aunt? The thought of adding stress to Aunt Evelyn's final days made Sienna's heart ache. For 2 days, Sienna barely left her apartment, the scent of her untouched herbal tea growing cold in the mug. She walked aimlessly from room to room, the quiet of her home amplified by the turmoil in her mind. Her freelance work, usually a source of calm and focus, lay untouched on her digital canvas. The vibrant colors on her screen seemed dull, lifeless, mirroring her own emotional landscape. She replayed conversations, scoured her memories for every subtle hint, every missed sign. The new lock on Aunt Evelyn's desk, Daniel's sudden interest in her finances, the strained tone in her aunt's voice, it all coalesced into a horrifyingly clear picture of calculated manipulation. Then, a quiet resolve began to harden. It wasn't a sudden burst of defiance, but a slow, deliberate steeling of her will. She looked at a framed photo on her bookshelf, Aunt Evelyn, her eyes sparkling with warmth, her arm around a much younger Sienna. That image, that love, was her anchor. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance, she was fighting for Aunt Evelyn's peace of mind, for the truth, for the sanctity of their bond. She would not let Daniel's greed define Aunt Evelyn's legacy or her own relationship with her. Sienna realized that remaining passive was no longer an option. To do nothing would be to tacitly accept Daniel's lies, to let him win, and that was unacceptable. She couldn't allow Aunt Evelyn's last memories of her to be tainted by Daniel's fabrications. Her agency began to manifest in small, deliberate actions. First, she called her closest friend, Maya, a sharp, no-nonsense journalist. Sienna, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, poured out the entire story. Maya listened, her occasional interjections sharp and perceptive. Sienna, Maya said, her voice firm, this isn't just about money. This is about emotional abuse and undue influence. You have to fight this. Maya's words, though direct, were a lifeline. Next, Sienna sat down at her computer, not to work on a design project, but to begin compiling a meticulously detailed timeline. Every visit, every phone call, every interaction with Aunt Evelyn, every unusual occurrence involving Daniel, she documented it. She gathered old photos, heartfelt cards from Aunt Evelyn, anything that proved the depth and genuine nature of their relationship. She started researching undue influence and will contests, her screen glowing late into the night. The more she read, the clearer her path became. This wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. It was about rectifying a grave injustice, about protecting Aunt Evelyn's true wishes, and ultimately, about standing up for herself. The vulnerability she had felt began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. She would not be a victim. She would act. Purposefully. Strategically. And Daniel, she promised herself, would learn the true cost of his betrayal. The turning point, for Sienna, wasn't a sudden explosion, but a meticulously planned series of moves, each one calibrated to dismantle Daniel's carefully constructed web of lies. Her internal struggle had solidified into an unshakable resolve. She knew exactly what she needed to do. Her first crucial step was to contact a lawyer specializing in estate law. Maya had given her a stellar recommendation, Ms. Eleanor Vance, a formidable attorney known for her meticulous approach and unwavering dedication to her clients. Sienna met Ms. Vance in her elegant, wood-paneled office, laying out her evidence, the detailed timeline of Daniel's suspicious visits, the accounts of Aunt Evelyn's sudden change in demeanor, the specific lies Daniel had planted. Sienna showed her the photo of Daniel with Aunt Evelyn from the day before the will reading, capturing his triumphant smirk. "He specifically ensured I couldn't be there," Sienna explained, her voice steady. "He knew that was the day Aunt Evelyn would sign the new will." Ms. Vance listened intently, her gaze sharp and assessing. "This is a strong case for undue influence, Sienna," she affirmed, her voice calm and authoritative. "The timing, the isolation, the misrepresentations, it all points to a deliberate pattern." A powerful surge of relief washed over Sienna. She wasn't alone in this. Ms. Vance immediately sent a formal letter to Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who had handled Aunt Evelyn's will, informing him of their intent to contest the will based on undue influence. This was a direct challenge, designed to halt any immediate distribution of assets and force Daniel's hand. But Sienna knew that a legal battle could be long, messy, and emotionally draining for everyone involved, especially Aunt Evelyn, if she were still alive to witness it. She needed something more, a definitive piece of evidence that would expose Daniel's deception without dragging her beloved aunt's name through a protracted court case. This is where her strategic mind, honed by years of meticulous design work, truly kicked in. The pivotal plot twist came from an unexpected source, Aunt Evelyn's love for old technology. Aunt Evelyn, despite her age, had a quirky fondness for her old, clunky landline phone, specifically its answering machine. It was an antique, one of those models with the tiny cassette tape inside. Sienna remembered countless times Aunt Evelyn would save silly, mundane messages, often forgetting to delete them. "It's like a little time capsule, dear," she'd always say with a giggle. Driven by a sudden, desperate hunch, Sienna drove to Aunt Evelyn's house. Daniel, in his haste to secure his supposed inheritance, had overlooked this small, seemingly insignificant detail. He had removed financial documents, sure, but he probably hadn't even thought about the old answering machine. As Sienna approached the house, her heart pounded. She quietly let herself in, the familiar scent of lavender instantly calming her nerves. She went straight to the old phone in the living room. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the play button. The machine whirred to life, and then, a series of saved messages began to play. Most were mundane, well wishes from friends, appointment reminders. Sienna fast-forwarded through them, her breath held. And then, it came. A voice, unmistakable, filled the room. It was Daniel's. His tone was cajoling, almost menacing. "Aunt Evelyn, you have to make these changes. Sienna is telling everyone she plans to sell the house right after you pass, and throw out all your precious things. She even said she'd put you in that dreadful nursing home, remember? She's just waiting for your money. You need to protect yourself, darling. This new will is the only way." He paused, and then, his voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Just sign here, Auntie. It's for your own good. I'll make sure you're taken care of, unlike some people." The recording was clear, damning, and absolutely undeniable. It captured Daniel's voice, his lies, his manipulation, and the pressure he exerted on Aunt Evelyn. It was a secret confession, hidden in plain sight. Sienna felt a cold shiver run down her spine, followed by a surge of triumphant vindication. This was it. This was the hidden asset, the undeniable proof she needed. The power had shifted, decisively, irrevocably. Daniel had underestimated her, had overlooked the small, seemingly insignificant details. And now, his betrayal would be exposed. The discovery of the answering machine recording felt like a seismic shift. Sienna replayed the chilling message several times, letting Daniel's deceitful words sink in. It wasn't just proof, it was a visceral experience of his manipulation, a window into the cruelty he had inflicted on Aunt Evelyn. Her hands, which had trembled in anticipation, now steadied with a quiet, fierce resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming an inheritance, it was about protecting Aunt Evelyn's memory, ensuring her true wishes were honored, and exposing Daniel for the manipulator he was. Sienna immediately contacted Ms. Vance, her estate lawyer. The attorney's voice, usually calm, held a note of genuine surprise and satisfaction when Sienna explained her discovery. "This is irrefutable, Sienna," Ms. Vance stated. "An audio recording of undue influence? This changes everything. It bypasses the need for a protracted trial and puts us in a position of undeniable strength." The unfolding of Sienna's secret plan was swift and precise. Ms. Vance drafted a formal demand letter, far more stringent than their initial notice. Attached to it was a full transcript of the damning audio recording, along with a statement from a reputable audio forensic expert confirming its authenticity. The letter outlined the clear evidence of undue influence, the emotional distress caused to Aunt Evelyn, and the malicious intent behind Daniel's actions. It demanded not only the reinstatement of Sienna's original share in the will, but also a significant compensation for emotional damages and legal fees, with a strict deadline for compliance. The alternative, the letter clearly stated, was a public legal battle that would inevitably expose Daniel's deceit to the entire family and, potentially, the wider community. The letter was delivered personally to Daniel's lawyer, and a copy was sent to Mr. Henderson. Sienna imagined the moment Daniel's lawyer listened to the recording, the shock, the dawning realization of the impossible situation Daniel had put himself in. Daniel's immediate reaction was precisely what Sienna had anticipated: furious denial, followed by frantic calls to Mr. Henderson, threatening frivolous lawsuits. He tried to dismiss the recording as fabricated, as a misunderstanding, as anything but the truth. But the forensic report was airtight. The true satisfaction came not from his anger, but from his growing desperation. Daniel, always so sure of himself, so confident in his ability to manipulate situations, was suddenly on the back foot. His carefully constructed facade of concern and familial loyalty was crumbling. He had underestimated Sienna, dismissing her as easily swayed and emotional, a trait he likely saw as a weakness. He had believed he could control the narrative, especially with Aunt Evelyn's declining health. He hadn't counted on her old answering machine, or Sienna's unwavering determination. His attempts to discredit the recording only solidified his guilt in the eyes of their bewildered relatives, to whom the news slowly began to spread through subtle hints and whispers from Mr. Henderson's office. Daniel had always maintained a polished image within the family, a successful businessman who was taking care of Aunt Evelyn. Now, that image was being shattered. Calls from concerned cousins, inquiries from distant relatives, began to flood his phone. He was starting to face the social consequences of his greed. He had tried to isolate Sienna, but in his desperate attempts to cover his tracks, he was isolating himself. The walls he had built around Aunt Evelyn to further his scheme were now closing in on him. Sienna wasn't seeking revenge, not in a destructive way. She was simply allowing the truth, hidden for so long, to finally bring about its own justice. The aftermath was less a storm and more a slow, inevitable unraveling for Daniel, and a quiet, profound resurgence for Sienna. The impact of the recorded confession was immediate and decisive. Daniel, cornered and exposed, had no choice but to capitulate. His lawyer, recognizing the futility of fighting irrefutable evidence and the potential for a public spectacle, advised him to settle. Within weeks, a revised will was officially recognized, reinstating Sienna's full inheritance, exactly as Aunt Evelyn had intended before Daniel's malicious interference. There was no grand confrontation, no shouting match. It was a cold, legal victory, delivered with the quiet efficiency of Ms. Vance. But the consequences for Daniel extended far beyond the legal settlement. The truth, once confined to Sienna and her lawyer, began to seep into the wider family network. Whispers turned into hushed conversations, and then into open disapproval. Daniel, who had always prided himself on his social standing and his carefully cultivated image as the responsible family member, found himself ostracized. Family gatherings, once an opportunity for him to subtly boast, became strained and awkward. The smiles from aunts and uncles were now thin, their gazes tinged with disappointment. Phone calls stopped. Invitations dwindled. He was no longer the favored nephew, the trusted brother. He was the one who had tried to cheat his own sister, who had manipulated a frail elderly woman. The social ostracism, the silent judgment, was a far more potent punishment than any financial penalty. Sienna heard through the grapevine that his business dealings were also starting to suffer, as his reputation for ruthless, unethical behavior spread within his professional circles. He had chased after material gain at the cost of his integrity, and now he was paying the price. For Sienna, the journey to recovery was multifaceted. The financial security provided by Aunt Evelyn's restored inheritance was a huge relief, allowing her to invest in her freelance business, upgrading her equipment, and expanding her reach. She took on bigger, more fulfilling projects, her creativity unburdened by financial anxiety. But the deeper healing was emotional. The betrayal had left a raw wound, a deep scar on her trust. There were moments of lingering doubt, of questioning herself. Could she ever truly trust family again? Would this shadow always hang over her? She sought therapy, working through the layers of pain and anger. It was a slow, sometimes difficult process, but with each session, she found more clarity, more peace. She focused on rebuilding her own life, on cultivating relationships based on genuine connection and mutual respect. She spent more time with Maya, her steadfast friend, who had been an unwavering source of support throughout the ordeal. She reconnected with other cousins, sharing stories and laughter, consciously rebuilding bonds that had been strained by Daniel's toxic influence. The shared love for Aunt Evelyn became a unifying force, a testament to her enduring spirit. Sienna also found unexpected strength in her own voice. The experience had forced her to stand up for herself, to confront a powerful injustice. She had faced down fear, doubt, and betrayal, and emerged stronger, more self-assured. Her once quiet nature gave way to a newfound assertiveness. She spoke up more, expressed her opinions with confidence, and no longer hesitated to set boundaries. She started volunteering at a local elder care facility, using her graphic design skills to create engaging materials for residents. It was a way to honor Aunt Evelyn's memory, to give back, and to ensure that other elderly individuals were treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. The path had been arduous, marked by profound hurt and difficult choices. But Sienna had navigated it with quiet resolve and strategic intelligence. She had been wronged, but she had not been defeated. She had proven Daniel wrong, not just about the will, but about her own strength. The quiet hum of my laptop, the soft glow of the monitor illuminating my face, these are the sounds and sights of my new normal. It's been 3 years since the will was finalized, since Daniel's deceit was exposed. My freelance graphic design business has flourished, expanding beyond my wildest dreams. I now work from a vibrant home office, sunlight streaming through large windows, my designs popping with colors that reflect my own renewed spirit. The financial security Aunt Evelyn's inheritance provided allowed me to invest in cutting-edge technology, take on challenging projects, and hire a small team of talented designers. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful, something impactful, every single day, is immense. I'm no longer just designing, I'm building a brand, a legacy of creativity and integrity. My personal life has also blossomed. The relationships I cherish, with Maya, with my cousins who rallied around me, even with distant relatives who expressed their quiet support, have deepened, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Family gatherings are no longer tainted by Daniel's presence or the tension he brought. They are warm, genuine affairs, filled with laughter and heartfelt connection, exactly as Aunt Evelyn would have wanted. We often tell stories about her, her memory cherished, her spirit alive in our shared affection. Daniel, on the other hand, faded into the background. His business eventually collapsed, a casualty of his tarnished reputation and a string of poor decisions. The financial ruin he experienced was his own doing, a direct consequence of his greed and lack of integrity. He lost everything he had chased so relentlessly, and in doing so, he lost the respect of almost everyone who once knew him. He never contacted me again, and I never sought him out. There was no need for grand pronouncements or further confrontation. The quiet justice of his downfall, and my own profound rise, was more than enough. My journey from betrayal to self-affirmation wasn't a sudden leap, it was a steady, deliberate climb. I learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but not always with the same people. I learned that true strength isn't about physical prowess or loud pronouncements, but about quiet resilience, strategic thinking, and an unwavering belief in your own worth. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, once a heavy burden, has transformed into a powerful catalyst. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, to tap into reserves of strength I never knew I possessed, and to ultimately forge a life far more authentic and fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Aunt Evelyn's love, her unwavering belief in me, remains my guiding light. Her legacy is not just the inheritance she left, but the invaluable lesson of standing firm in the face of injustice, of proving that kindness and integrity will always, ultimately, triumph. I am Sienna, and I proved them wrong. Not with anger, but with truth. Not with vengeance, but with unwavering resolve. And in doing so, I didn't just reclaim what was rightfully mine, I reclaimed myself. If this journey from betrayal to empowerment moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of unbreakable spirits. Share in the comments, have you ever had to rise above someone's cruelty? Your story could inspire others.